Hey everyone, welcome to the RealAg Radio After Show. We got lots to cover here and break down. We're fresh off the air, off of Rural Radio 147. Lots to get to. We'll recap the news, what happened today in the markets, and of course, it's live, so we get your participation. Let's get to it. And what this RealAg Radio After Show is all about is, we get off the air on Rural Radio 147. They only give us an hour over there, so sometimes we got more to talk about, and here we are. Thanks for joining us, whether you're watching live or watching the replay on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. We are here to have some fun. We are live. You can participate in the discussion by entering your comment in the box wherever you are watching. Today's RealAg Radio Show was brought to you by Mazex. Big thanks to them for being on board with Real Agriculture. I encourage you, go to mazex.com. You can see it there on your screen. Check out their full lineup of corn and soybean varieties and hybrids. Encourage you to do so. Silage, corn grazing, soybean varieties, grain corn. They got everything. So check it out. Encourage you to do so. Let's take a look here. What happened today in the markets, and we'll pull it up here. So I gotta make that bigger. I don't know if any of you can actually read that. I sure the heck can't. There, that's better, eh? I think so. Okay, so we got December corn was down 3 1/4. Corn just basically, just barely to the downside. Soybeans in November down 9.5 to 14.78 3/4. Let's see what did wheat do today. Chicago wheat was up a little, 1 3/4 to 860.5. And spring wheat for all of you out there in Western Canada, looking at up a little bit, 4 3/4 up to 931.25 for the December contract in Minneapolis wheat. Oats was down 8 in December to 402 flat, and canola just barely up a little bit. Basically, the final on November canola was 801.40. That's up $1.70. So yeah, kind of a sort of a flat day in the markets here today on this Tuesday. Happy risk management and hedging out there, everybody. Lots of fun when it comes to that right now. Today on the show, like I said, was brought to you by Mazex. We had a great discussion with Kelvin Hepner talking about Pierre Poilievre as the new leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. We talked about that lots here today or yesterday on the after show. We don't need to get too far into that. Ken did say yesterday, he said I was too... I had mentioned that I wish I was on the inside of some of the strategic planning meetings that were happening for both parties, and Ken had said I was too dogmatic for that. He sent me an email afterwards and said, "No, Shaun, you're too pragmatic." I don't know what happened. Autocorrect. So he wasn't trying to say I was dogmatic. It was pragmatic. So if you do have any thoughts on Pierre Poilievre as the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, what it means for the race politically against the Trudeau Liberals, or what it means for agriculture, and what are some of the key topics they will be hammering on, please feel free to send us a note. We also heard today from Corny Thiessen. He's general manager at Adama Canada. We talked about the supply chain as it relates to crop protection products, and basically is this whole idea of supply chain crisis, supply chain issues. Are we going to have to think about this in 2023? Are we finally past it? And he really provided a very good overview. If you missed it, I encourage you to listen to on the RealAg Radio podcast about no, we're not. And some of the changes that are coming into place, you may not see till like 2024 and 25. There's a lot of things working against global supply chains right now. He did mention they're doing a run of 2,4-D and MCPA in North America for the first time in a while. So there's an indication that there has been some shifting around and diversification of that supply chain. But we're going to post that interview with Corny on the site because I thought it was really good. I thought he did a very good job of breaking down all the different things that are need to be considered when it comes to the global supply chain for crop protection manufacturers. And he sort of supported that it's not over. He supported what I've been hearing from some people. We didn't get into it because he's from Adama, but BSF and Liberty comes to mind about what are some of the changes they're going to make, because that was one of the shortfalls this year was just not having as much liberty as they wanted to or thought they had going into the season. So that's something we'll have to definitely follow up with BSF on for sure. In terms of the news, I would say, I got to make this bigger. This is a lot of work for one person. This is from the Globe and Mail. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced a $4.6 billion package of income-tested measures aimed at helping Canadians in need with the higher cost of living, while insisting that the injection of new cash into the economy will not make inflation worse. Wow, $4.6 billion. It does say here that, interestingly enough, $3 billion of this is new spending that has not been previously budgeted. I think there's going to be a lot of focus on this right here, that part, while insisting that the injection of new cash into the economy will not make the inflation worse. This has been positioned as inflation relief, but many are going to say, and really disagree with what I've highlighted there, saying this is how we got into this problem. We had to do there were so many COVID dollars through the pandemic, putting more and more money into people's pockets, savings increased, and now here we are. And it's not just a Canadian issue, of course. It's also in the U.S., it's also in Europe, it's in Australia. One of the only countries that's really avoided inflation is China, but they're in a whole different political regime. So this is going to be a very interesting one to kind of follow. There's a dental package involved in this. So the dental package and rent supports are elements of the March deal between Liberals and the NDP that saw the latter party agree to support the minority government on key votes in exchange for action on a list of policy priorities. So this is Jagmeet Singh and the NDP cashing in on that deal with the Liberals to basically make sure that this minority government did not fall. The other issue that we're really following that is not getting a lot of attention in Canada, but I'll tell you what, when I'm on AgriTalk on Fridays, this is a big topic, and that is the potential for a major rail strike in the U.S. So stakeholders failed to reach a contract agreement with two unions representing much of the workforce and a federally mandated 30-day cooling off period ending on Friday, which really opens the door to strikes and lockouts. Some freight companies have started to limit services, and Amtrak, which carries many travelers on lines operated by freight railroads, said it would cancel some passenger service starting today. This affects a lot of railway traffic. I saw some graphs today. Corn, wheat, soybeans, major crop commodities that are impacted if this strike is to go through. There's a quote here. This is all from the Wall Street Journal. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa, said in a tweet that Biden needs to step in and tell those holding out to keep negotiating or take the deal. And if they can't, Congress must. So Grassley encouraging Congress to potentially act here. There was a number of quotes from President Biden about how detrimental a strike would be to the U.S. economy. Give me a second here. Jeff Nielsen. Hey, Jeff. Hey, I can preview something, everybody. Jeff is actually on the Friday Issues panel on RealAg Radio. So when was the last time the U.S. had rail issues like this? Wow. Good question, Jeff. Let's see. I can tell you that this kind of stuff doesn't come up a lot. Like when they talk about logistical transportation issues in regards to ag commodities in particular, it's always about the river system. We rarely talk about railways, and so that's what kind of makes this a little bit very interesting. The railways are getting so much discussion here. What does it say? The unions had just advanced a proposal that included an allowance that workers can take unpaid time for a doctor's appointment without being disciplined, according to Dennis Pierce, national president of the 57,000-member Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen Division of the Railway Conference. It's no longer about money. It's about unpaid time off to go to the doctor without getting fired, says Pierce to the New York Times. So, Jeff, I don't know the answer to that. I shouldn't even try to guess. It's a very good question. We'll try to look it up, and I will get back to you on that and maybe get the information to you before Friday when you're on the show on Friday. How about that? Yeah, so check out Jeff Nielsen on Friday on the RealAg Issues panel on RealAg Radio. Here is a scary one for you, okay? This is from Pro Farmer. China is willing to work with Russia to take the global order in a more just and reasonable direction. Let's just think about that for a second. This is according to Beijing's top diplomat. China is willing to work with Russia to take the global order in a more just and reasonable direction. Besides Iran and Syria, could you think of two countries you would least want you to be leading the world in a different direction? This is going to be Xi Jinping, the president of China, his first trip outside of China since the beginning of the pandemic. He's going to meet Vladimir Putin at a meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The gathering will take place on Thursday in Uzbekistan and comes at a time that the two are becoming increasingly reliant on each other for goods and services. Yeah. This is it's kind of this is what, you know, if you've been reading The Economist, maybe Foreign Policy magazine, these are the kind of things that some foreign affairs reporters, analysts have been very, very worried about. And I guess maybe there's one positive out of this: the relationship is out in the open. It's not happening behind closed doors. This is the leader of China meeting with Vladimir Putin at a time where they're bombing the crap out of Ukraine. So this is called choosing sides. Okay. Lower gas costs slowed U.S. inflation for a second straight month in August, but most other prices across the economy kept rising, evidence that inflation remains a heavy burden for American households. Consumer prices rose 8.3% from a year earlier and 0.1% from July, but the jump in core prices, which include volatile food and energy costs, was especially worrisome. It outpaced expectations and ignited fear that the Federal Reserve will boost interest rates more aggressively and raise the risk of a recession. There is a pretty clear path here for the Federal Reserve to raise rates 75 basis points in next week's Fed meeting. Remember, Canada just did that raise, so I continue to maintain. I think although this is kind of baked in, and people are going to assume the 75 basis point rise is going to happen, what is even more interesting is what happens on the other side. Where do we go from here? How hawkish, how aggressive does the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve get when it comes to these rates? And you know what? I think you're going to hear a lot in the financial news, people coming on and talking about how, you know, this is a failure, the economy is in real trouble. But there are in both countries there are some good points too. That's what makes these decisions so difficult to maneuver and steer through, because it's not that black and white. But inflation is not taming as much as some people thought. A strong majority of economists, 44 of 72, predicted the central bank would hike its Fed funds rate by 75 basis points next week after two such moves in June and July, compared to only 20% who said it just a month ago. So that seems to be where the smart money is very much betting. And of course, farmers are really, you know, some of the, you know, one of the industries that are really having to deal with the rise in rates. You know, there's a lot borrowed in agriculture. Some of it is locked in, and congratulations if you made that decision. And some of it is floating, and it is paid to float for a long time. And this is kind of some new territory, so to speak. And the question is, if you had to renew a mortgage today, even with all the hikes that we've had, what do you do? I've posed that question to a few people. I've got a whole wide range of answers. Everything from you lock it in because it's only getting worse from here, or I've heard other people say you lock half, you float half, you kind of play both sides of the fence because we really don't know. There is some economists, I think it's less of a group of economists, that believe that we could see cuts to interest rates the back half of next year, especially if they overshoot this and they raise rates too fast, too far, too soon. But there's also, I've talked to people that have said, hey, you know what? I'd let her all float because if you're going to lock it in, you should have done that a year ago as opposed to now. I have no idea. So if you're going to come to me with what would you do? Zero clue. I don't know. I think I would probably be a little bit more in that middle. I would ride the fence. And if you got a strong feeling on that, what you think if your neighbor walked up to you and said, hey, I'm buying this new piece of dirt. I'm paying $2 million for it. I'm taking on a mortgage. What would you do with the rates? It's a fascinating discussion. And there's really no clear answer at this point. And if you're a person that's been concerned about interest rate increases for, like, we've been doing potential interest rate rise stories on Real Agriculture since the beginning, since 2008, and it never really felt like it was at all any kind of a reality. Well, now it's real. So it's very much something that farmers that have money borrowed have to deal with for sure. We know this about the economy: the housing market is slowing. I'm looking on my street. There's a few houses for sale. There was a period this time last year, maybe a little bit back in like January, December, February. Boy, you put a house on the market, it was gone. And now what we've got is we've got a lot of houses sitting on the market for longer. And one down the street that I think they've had to drop like 3 times. So you can definitely see that the housing market is slowing. That's one anecdote. That's not representative of the whole market. But real estate is a big part of the Canadian economy that will have a lot of people really concerned on what this health looks like in the go forward for sure. I am going to post the Corny Thiessen out of Canada interview about crop protection manufacturers and some of the thinking on 2023 supplies. It's not probably what you want to hear, but I think Corny did a very good job of being honest about it. Really. He could say, it's going to be all fine, and then later on say, we kind of missed this. I would rather have them be a little bit, I don't know, there's some things we have not figured out. There's some things that haven't changed. And if it under promise, over deliver, I think is a good strategy, especially compared to last year. So I encourage you to check that out. Also, Calvin Hepner and I had a fantastic discussion when it came to what we can expect out of Pierre Poilievre and this new version of the Conservative Party of Canada and what they have to do to win the next election, and what we could see as a response from Prime Minister Trudeau and the Liberal Party. Canadian Cowman says, how long did interest rates rise in the 70s and 80s? I think we are just at the beginning of this thing. So good. I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to go back and look at the historical, how quickly all that happened. I would say that's where I think a lot of farmers are going to bet. Like, this would be a really interesting Real Agri study survey. We did some inflation surveying back in the springtime. Canadians at that time Canadian farmers were very concerned about inflation. We've come, a lot has changed since the spring. Interest rates going up has been one of them. But I believe, now, here's the reason why I believe that a lot of Canadian farmers, and U.S. farmers for that matter, are going to agree with you, Canadian Cowman. I think we are just at the beginning of this thing because they lived, many of them farmed through the 80s. And you know what? even if you didn't farm through the 80s and say your parents did, I am sure, because I know mine did, they talk about it a lot, and very rightly so. There was hardship, and we are a long way from where interest rates were in the 1980s. But just making that connection where we see inflation we haven't seen since the early 80s, late 70s, low unemployment we haven't seen since, going back 30 years. The reference back to that time period brings up a lot of those conversations, a lot of those memories. And so no matter what economists tell us in terms of how long they think this is, can it really be a soft landing? How long does stagflation go on? Push all that aside. I think living through the 1980s, farming through the 1980s, really, really left its mark on the industry. No different than the 1930s left their mark on a generation of people. Like my grandfather, he never left the mentality of the 1930s. Even in the 1980s and 90s, in the early 2000s, he was still operating under the premise that we had to straighten nails, right? And so I think that 1980s will really, really put into concrete how people feel about the road ahead. That's just me speculating, but that would be interesting to get kind of the sentiment of Canadians in that regard. That's something we'll keep in mind for a future Real Agri Studies survey. By the way, speaking of Real Agri Studies, we have a new survey dropping this week. We're launching a Canadian Sentiment Index. So we're going to measure the sentiment on a number of different factors: future profitability, risk management, confidence in government. There's going to be something there on mental health. We're putting together a Canadian Agricultural Sentiment Index. The first launch is going out this week. We're also going to ask questions about the Canadian fertilizer emission reduction, that aspirational target the government's been talking about. We've got some questions around that as well. How concerned are you? Why are you concerned? Why are you not concerned? And talk about some of your practices that you're already doing to kind of make a difference when it comes to some of this climate file. So lots happening over here. There's no slow days here at Real Agriculture, and we just love it. And I appreciate everybody tuning in today for the RealAg Radio After Show. Always fun. And you know what? I've got tomorrow's show for RealAg Radio, and then I'm off Thursday and Friday. Got to go to a conference. But the radio show will be in the capable hands of Lindsay Smith. So looking forward to listening to that program, just like many of you as well. Hey, big shout out to everybody that tuned in today live. If you watched the replay, thank you very much. Just want to say check out realagriculture.com and send me your feedback anytime. shaney@realagriculture.com. Cheers, everybody.